Hello and welcome back to Tutoring with Gavin. In this video tutorial, I'll be examining the four main themes of the play An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. Theme 1. Moral Responsibility. Inspector Gould's function in the play is to expose the moral responsibility of the others in the death of Eva Smith. He may not be able to build a criminal case against them, but he can reveal their moral culpability. Priestley cleverly shows how their guilt would have been hidden were it not for the inspector, which suggests that social injustice was common in 1912 when the play is set, and to a lesser extent in 1945 when the play was first performed. As a socialist, Priestley believed that those in power have a moral responsibility towards those without wealth or power, and this play is his way of addressing this. Berling seems to lack any sense of responsibility for others. He's a capitalist and an individualist. Berling says, "The way some of these cranks talk and write now, you think everybody has to look after everybody else. Community and all that nonsense." He says this with confidence at a dinner party with others who think the same. There is no one to challenge these views, that is, until Inspector Gould arrives. The inspector says, "It's my duty to ask questions." He says this as a police officer, but he is also the voice of Priestley, asking challenging questions to those in power. This is shocking for the Berlins because the police are usually more accommodating towards the rich and powerful. British Empire and other imperial nations at this time also believed as if they had no responsibility towards others, which resulted in centuries of inhumane behaviour and exploitation, and finally 2 world wars. Priestley is suggesting that it's capitalism and imperialism that are immoral and responsible for suffering. For more information on this and other contexts for the play, watch my video tutorial. Theme 2. Age. As the older generation, Berling and his wife represent selfishness in society, and their ideals are ingrained into their children. Both Eric and Sheila have contributed to the cause of Eva's death, but whereas their parents refuse to accept their role in events, the children show that they are able to learn from their mistakes. In Act 2, Sheila tells the inspector, "I know I'm to blame, and I'm desperately sorry." Sheila changes quickly from a naive and selfish upper-middle-class young woman into a supportive voice for the inspector's case against the family. Perhaps Priestley is more positive politically about the younger generation, optimistic that they will one day hold power, which presents real hope for social change, while condemning the older generation of middle and upper classes for their greed and selfishness. In contrast to Sheila, in Act 2, Mrs. Berling says, "I accept no blame for it at all." Gerald Croft is caught in the middle, being neither very young nor old. In the end, he sides with the older generation, perhaps because his aristocratic roots influence him to want to keep his status quo and protect his own interests. Theme 3. Class. As a socialist, Priestley understood how the class system had been designed so that a powerful few could exploit and control the vast majority of people in society. The political, educational, legal and economic systems were structured to favour the upper classes, and to a lesser extent the middle classes. The Berling household is a microcosm of this world of privilege, and Inspector Gould is shining a metaphorical spotlight on it for a post-war audience that has experienced 2 devastating world wars and seen the decline of the empire. Ironically, the audience watching this play would have been typically middle or upper class. Berling tries to use his influence and power to put pressure on the inspector when he talks about the chief constable. "Perhaps I ought to warn you that he's an old friend of mine. We play golf together." The inspector responds dryly, "I don't play golf." This is important because it shows that the inspector is not intimidated or impressed by the privileged class, and that he would do his duty irrespective of the pressure that is put on him. Although she is dead, Eva represents the working class perspective. She lacks power and control over her life and suffers at the hands of those with a higher social status. In particular, Mrs. Berling, who says, "girls of that class," as if women from the working class were less moral, which is ironic when we see how immorally Gerald Croft and the Berlings have behaved. Eva is symbolic of the plight of millions of poor and powerless people. Berling has already demonstrated how he feels about the working class. If you don't come down hard on these people, they'll soon be asking for the world. Inspector Gould's final speech summarises a socialist response to this contempt. There are millions of Eva Smiths. They're suffering, all intertwined with our lives. Priestley is using the inspector to warn those in power. If men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. This seems to imply social unrest, or even revolution. Theme 4. Gender. Sheila and Mrs. Berling represent the contrast between 20th century and Victorian attitudes. Priestley is showing his 1945 audience how things can change further. Women had shown, during the last 2 wars, that they were equal in the workplace. Mrs. Berling repeatedly refers to Eva and Sheila as girls, and seems to provide support for the patriarchal system that see women as weaker. It would be much better if Sheila didn't listen to this story. Berling, Gerald and Eric are all misogynistic. Eric says of Eva, She was pretty and a good sport. He sees her as a sexual object and used her as such. He admits, I was in a state when a chap easily turns nasty, suggesting he forced himself on her. Burling says of Eva, she was a good-looking girl, country bred I fancy. Gerald says, I noticed a girl who looked quite different. She was pretty. Eva's looks are the most important thing to these men. They are not interested in her as a person. When the play is set in 1912, there was a growing suffragette movement. The men have all the power over the women in this patriarchal world, considering their value only in respect of their attractiveness to men. Well, I hope this has helped you in your GCSE revision. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, and please be sure to subscribe to the channel so that I can continue to make these free videos. Until next time.